He told the courtroom that he wasn't sorry, not for the escape, not for the violence he unleashed. The judge flipped through the photographs, grainy snapshots from a security camera, a battered door swung open, and a terrified woman, with eyes wide like an animal cornered in its own den. Then, there was the body in the hallway, face turned away, dark hair fanned around her head in a sickening halo. What stung everyone who heard the prosecutor recount the facts was that she wasn't even the one he'd meant to kill. She was the wrong sister. Some reporters who stood in the back of the courtroom, notepads in hand, said it was the single most horrifying tragedy they'd ever covered. A prisoner, shackled and wearing an orange jumpsuit, had murdered an innocent twin. She had no idea who he was when he showed up banging on the door that night, her last night alive. Over 2,000 pages of testimony, depositions, and confessions would try to answer one question: how it all started. And yet, the final truth was as layered as the city's underground secrets, woven into the mundane routines of people who never thought they'd be the subject of a primetime news expose. No one in that room would ever forget the harsh clang when the gavel hit the judge's desk for the final sentencing. But the story didn't begin in that courtroom. It began in an apartment block in the southwestern edge of the city where dusty windows overlooked an empty street shimmering with the ghosts of broken promises. Neon lights flickered outside the convenience store where Maria Delgado, exhausted from her night shift at the diner, stepped in to buy a carton of milk. She had worked a double because she needed the overtime to help her sister with rent. Sophia, her twin, was going through a nasty breakup, needed to move out of a toxic living situation, or so Maria believed. The city's hum at this hour was subdued, an eerie hush like it was holding its breath. As Maria stepped out of the store, a battered news van pulled up, its tires squealing. A reporter hopped out, hair disheveled, motioning frantically to the cameraman. Something big had gone down across the block. Blue and red lights illuminated the intersection. Sirens whined in the background, their echoes bouncing off the deserted sidewalks. Maria paused. She felt an inexplicable shiver crawl down her spine, as if something or someone were calling her from the night. She almost asked what had happened, but the reporter was already pushing past her, the lens capturing the swirl of adrenaline in the humid air. She decided to keep moving, sliding her hands into her jacket pockets. All she wanted was to see if Sophia had come home yet. They shared a modest second-floor apartment overlooking a defunct pizzeria whose neon sign never turned off, flickering like an omen of half-broken hope. Meanwhile, across town in a cramped holding cell, Brian Roth counted the cracks in the concrete wall. He was due for a parole hearing in a matter of weeks. His life was measured in this kind of emptiness, blank space, monotony, and the swirl of thoughts about the wife he'd left behind. She had betrayed him, he'd always told himself. She'd made him the clown of the block, hooking up with someone behind his back while he served a sentence for something he'd done to protect her, or so his twisted logic claimed. Brian shut his eyes and pictured her face. He saw the smile she'd given him in court that one time she testified on his behalf, hoping the judge would go easy. He saw it vanish when the conviction came down. In her mind, maybe she was no longer bound to him. But he never forgot, never forgave. The bitterness clung to him in every dreamless night. He was sure she was cheating, and then he found out she was living with her twin sister temporarily. Somewhere near that flickering neon sign, a cheap apartment with peeling paint on the walls, that's where she was hiding. He knew it because his cousin's ex-wife's friend worked at a local call center and overheard something about it. Word traveled in strange ways when you were locked up with nothing but a phone call here and there. And Brian let that knowledge fester like an infected wound. The fantasies became unstoppable. He planned it out like a meticulous blueprint. He'd show up unannounced and see the shock on her face as she realized there was no running, no escaping his wrath. Then the nightmares would end and she'd pay for her betrayal. He couldn't stand that she'd turned her back on him after all the nights they'd spent together, vowing never to let the city chew them up. He felt like the city had claimed her loyalty, not him. But that night, while Maria slept and Brian stared at the wall, an entirely different drama played out in the battered corners of the city. Police cruisers raced through the main street in pursuit of a stolen maintenance van. One of the prison guards had been overpowered during a facility transport run, and the unthinkable had occurred. An inmate had escaped in broad daylight. Nobody knew who at first. Rumors circulated, maybe some low-level offender or a drug runner from the east side. By the time the alarm reached the outer blocks, Brian had vanished. At a checkpoint near the waterway, a guard found the transport officer bound and gagged, bruises on his face, reeking of gasoline but still breathing. He muttered something about Roth and, "He's gone." Dispatchers radioed the news to every patrol car. Brian Roth, inmate number 43,821, had disappeared, presumably heading straight for the city. The question was, why now? Nobody knew the full story behind Brian, not even the warden who'd processed him. All that mattered was that an escaped inmate was on the loose, with a track record of violence. The detective on duty, Dana Caldwell, pinned up a mugshot on the precinct's corkboard. Lean, wiry, dark eyes that carried a simmering hatred. She circled his face with a red marker and whispered to herself, "We have to find him before he does something we can't undo." But inside, she knew they might already be too late. Around midnight, Maria heard her sister's key rattle in the lock. She sprang off the couch, relief flooding her. She was worried about Sophia's well-being. Ever since the rumored breakup, Sophia had been anxious, checking her phone obsessively as if waiting for a dreaded call. But tonight, Sophia looked more troubled than usual. Her hair stuck to her forehead in sweaty strands, and her cheeks shone under the dim light. She threw her bag on the armchair, letting out a shaky sigh. "You won't believe what's happening out there," she said, voice trembling. She recounted how she'd passed through the police barricades near the train station, glimpsed the swirl of red and blue lights. The words "escaped prisoner" seemed to linger in the air like a dark prophecy. Maria tried to brush it off with some dry humor. "We picked a great neighborhood, huh?" But the laugh died in her throat. Sophia sank into the chair, biting her lip. She hadn't been entirely truthful about why she left her ex. Maria suspected there was more to it. Some nights, Sophia woke up gasping from nightmares she refused to explain. On the table lay a single photograph of them at some festival ages ago. They both wore matching dresses, smiling ear to ear. Impossible to tell who was who unless you really knew them. The bond they shared was strong, or so Maria thought. She offered Sophia a cup of tea, gently pressing for details about what exactly went wrong with that relationship. Sophia shook her head, tears welling up. "It's messy. He was controlling. He did time once. I never told you." She hesitated. "His name was Brian Roth. I didn't want you to judge me." The color drained from Maria's face. She'd heard that name. It was on the news tonight. Sophia realized from Maria's look that everything she'd been running from had just caught up to her in the worst possible way. The next morning, before the sun even rose, the news channels blared the headline, "Escaped prisoner Brian Roth still at large." They showed footage of a prison transport van scuttled off the highway, the guard with his face battered delivering a short, shaky statement. The anchor described Brian Roth's appearance and warned citizens to keep their doors locked, to report any suspicious sightings. Sophia sat curled on the couch, watching the broadcast in grim silence while Maria stood behind her, hands on her shoulders. The phone rang, startling them both. It was the police, or a detective to be exact. She introduced herself as Dana Caldwell and asked if either of them had contact with Brian Roth. Sophia stammered, "I left him. I don't want anything to do with him." The detective's voice was calm, reassuring, but urgent. She insisted that the sisters inform her immediately if Brian made any attempt to reach out or if they saw anyone suspicious near their apartment. Maria took the phone and asked, voice trembling, "Do we need, protection? Are we in danger?" The detective hesitated. "You just need to stay alert and call me if anything happens." The line clicked. Sophia buried her face in her hands. She didn't want to drag Maria into her private hell, but it was too late. The city news cycle spun faster than either sister could keep up. In the chaos, the media found an old mugshot of Brian. The lines in his face were deeper now, but the eyes were the same, hollow, furious, cold. A friend from the diner texted Maria, "Lock your doors, heard he's out for blood." In a different part of the city, among tall industrial buildings, Brian used a payphone outside a tire shop that had long since closed down. He dialed a number he memorized months ago. The phone rang endlessly, echoing into the lonely street. No answer. He hung up, slammed the receiver onto the metal cradle, cursing under his breath. The dryness in his mouth reminded him he hadn't had anything to eat or drink since he'd overpowered the guard. He rummaged through a nearby dumpster, finding half a bottle of water, gulping it down with grim determination. Then he saw his reflection in a shattered mirror, a man reduced to primal desperation. The radio in the stolen maintenance van told him that the entire city was on alert. Roadblocks on the main highway, random ID checks at the bus station, cops on every other corner. He pulled the hood of his sweatshirt low over his face. He wouldn't hide forever. He had a mission to complete. Something about betrayal burned in his gut. He muttered, as if speaking to the ghosts of the city, "I gave her my everything. And she's with her sister now, hiding from me?" The night seemed to respond with a silent hush, the wind carrying discarded newspapers across the pavement. A pang of grim satisfaction hit him. Let the entire police force come for him. He'd settle his score first. Sophia lay in bed that night, wide awake, listening for every creak in the hallway. Maria was in the next room, tossing and turning. The apartment felt stifling. She could barely breathe, consumed by the fear that her ex would appear at the door. She replayed their last conversation in her mind, how he'd turned from charming to volatile the moment she suggested they take a break. He'd shattered a glass, cut his hands, smeared blood on the wall in a rage. After that, she ran, never looking back. She remembered the feeling of his eyes on her, even after she'd left. The phone calls from random numbers, that note slipped under her door. "I'll never let you go." She shuddered at the memory. At dawn, she drifted off into a fitful sleep, dreaming of a locked door rattling violently, the handle about to come off. When she woke, the handle was indeed rattling. Heart pounding, she realized it was Maria, quietly turning the knob. The relief was overwhelming, but the fear remained. A few nights later, the tension in the city escalated when a local newscast reported a break-in at a sporting goods store near downtown. Security footage showed a man who resembled Brian rummaging through shelves, disappearing with a long hunting knife, some rope, and a flashlight. The battered lock at the entrance suggested a forced entry with a crowbar. Police found footprints near the alley, but the trail ended abruptly. Detective Caldwell did a brief press conference urging everyone to remain calm but alert. She knew she had to corner Brian before he struck. In a private conversation caught on an open mic, she said, "This guy isn't just running. He's looking for something or someone." The microphone cut off, but the insinuation remained. People scrolled through their phones, stared at the TV in hospital waiting rooms, whispered in coffee shops. Everybody was frightened by the idea that a murderer roamed free, ready to explode at any moment. The city felt the tension like a nerve pulled taut, threatened by the snap of violence. And in that churn of paranoia, half-truths and rumors multiplied. One rumor said Brian was spotted near the old freight yard. Another said he'd hijacked a truck. Still another claimed he was seen wearing a stolen policeman's uniform. The city's rumor mill churned day and night, but Detective Caldwell guessed the truth was simpler. Brian was methodically closing in on his wife. One quiet Sunday evening, a neighbor knocked on Maria's door, breathless. "Girl, there was a suspicious guy in the hallway, I swear. I think it might have been that Brian guy." Fear seized the sisters. They locked the windows, drew the blinds, and called the police. An officer came by, shining a flashlight up and down the corridor, found nothing. The sisterly bond began to show cracks under the stress. Maria accused Sophia of dragging them into this by not telling the whole truth. Sophia lashed back that it wasn't her fault Brian was an unstable monster. Emotions flared. They apologized later, hugging each other, tears rolling down their cheeks. "It's us against him," Maria said, voice choked with tears. Sophia nodded. They vowed to stay safe, to keep their phones on at all times, to be ready for anything. But nothing could prepare them for the night the city had a sudden blackout, plunging entire blocks into darkness, leaving them vulnerable to the persistent knock that would eventually come. That night, the sky was moonless, the streetlights dead due to some substation failure. The entire block was cloaked in darkness. Residents lit candles, the golden flicker dancing eerily behind curtained windows. In the sisters' apartment, every shadow seemed suspicious. Maria rummaged through a drawer and pulled out an old pepper spray canister. She tested it, still functional. Sophia clutched a phone with the detective's number on speed dial. Then came a faint tapping at the front door. They froze. It started soft, but then it grew louder, more insistent, as though someone was testing if they were home. They exchanged a look of utter terror. Maria tiptoed closer, pressing her ear against the wood. She heard heavy breathing on the other side, then a voice, low and forced. "Open up, I know you're in there." The doorknob shook violently. Sophia started hyperventilating, her knuckles turning white around her phone. Maria pressed the speed dial, ringing, no answer. Desperation kicked in. She remembered the pepper spray. She whispered to Sophia, "Stay back." As she moved toward the door, the banging intensified. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Silence. The sisters waited a full 5 minutes. Sophia quietly sobbed, tears streaking her cheeks. Maria hissed, "Maybe he left," but they couldn't be sure. Unable to stand the suspense, Maria slid the chain lock in place and eased the door open a crack. The hallway was empty, not a soul in sight. Relieved, yet shaken, they slid the door shut again, hearts pounding like they'd run a marathon. On that night, with the entire block enveloped in darkness, neither sister could shake the feeling that Brian was near, that he'd tested their defenses. They didn't sleep until the dawn light broke over the rooftops, until the electricity hummed back to life with a mechanical whir. That morning, the news reported a sighting of Brian on the outskirts, but no arrests were made. One radio host joked, "He's like a ghost," but nobody was laughing. From the outside, it looked like the city was losing its mind over one fugitive. But for Sophia, Brian was a specter of all her failures, all her shame. She started having nightmares, waking Maria in the middle of the night with screams that made the walls tremble. In the nightmares, Brian cornered her in a small room, brandishing a knife, yelling about betrayal. She was so disturbed that she insisted they try staying with a friend in another part of town. Maria thought it was a good plan, so they packed a few bags, took a cab to a friend's loft, and tried to hide out. The friend Carla welcomed them, offering them a cramped sofa bed in her living room. She understood the seriousness of their situation, but even Carla couldn't ignore the uneasy vibe that accompanied them. Every phone ring, every footstep in the hallway made the sisters flinch. And then, Sophia's phone buzzed at 3 a.m. with a text from an unknown number. It read, "I see you." She dropped the phone like it was on fire. Panic soared. Maria grabbed the phone, trembling hands pressing random buttons. "It's him," Sophia whispered. Carla urged them to call the police. Detective Caldwell arrived early that morning, wearing a wrinkled blazer, dark circles under her eyes. She took the phone, studied it. "We'll trace it," she said, but her tone was resigned. "He's probably using a burner phone or some unregistered line. This might not give us an immediate lead." Sophia's eyes brimmed with tears, fury mixed with terror. "He won't stop until he finds me," she said. Caldwell put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll try to get you some protection, but you need to be cautious. Don't wander off alone. Don't answer unknown calls." Maria squeezed Sophia's hand as if to say, "We're in this together." That day stretched endlessly, the oppressive gray clouds threatening rain. Sophia found herself lost in thought, replaying everything that happened between her and Brian. In the early days, he was the hero. He'd saved her from a drunk who harassed her at a bus stop, gave her a place to crash when she missed rent. She fell for his protective side, not knowing it was just the other face of obsessive control. She remembered the first time he hit a wall near her head, leaving a gaping hole in the plaster. She told herself he was just drunk, that he was hurting inside. Her denial was so strong she almost married him. She believed that love could fix him, but every bruise, every scream, and every tear made it clearer that he was beyond saving. Yet the final straw came when he threatened her with a knife, eyes black with anger. She pressed charges. He ended up locked away on an assault conviction. She visited him a few times, but then discovered he'd been lying, stealing, dealing with dangerous people. She cut ties. She never expected him to break free. Carla brought her a glass of water, a small gesture of comfort. Sophia looked at the swirling patterns on the glass. She wondered if she'd ever be free from him, if the city or the police or anyone could truly protect her. Outside, the first raindrops began tapping on the window, as if in quiet mourning for all the illusions she'd lost. Eventually, the pressure on law enforcement intensified. The mayor's office demanded swift resolution. Fearful citizens bombarded the police hotline with reports, genuine or not. Detective Caldwell convened a meeting with her team, a cluster of plainclothes detectives and uniformed officers. A new lead suggested that Brian had a contact on the north side who might be harboring him. Caldwell's plan was to sweep that area aggressively, rounding up any known associates. But in the back of her mind, she knew that Brian's endgame was personal. She hypothesized that he wouldn't run away or flee the state. He'd be drawn to the one place he believed held all the answers, the sister's apartment or wherever Sophia was now hiding. She left a message with Carla's phone, urging Sophia and Maria to hold tight, that she was assigning an officer to watch the building, but the city's resources were stretched thin. Carjackings, drug raids, and other violent incidents demanded attention too. Brian Roth wasn't the only criminal in town. He was just the most sensational. The media loved the narrative, an escaped convict out to kill his cheating wife. Ratings soared, and so did the public's dread. Some opportunistic tabloid even published a story that Sophia was pregnant, running the headline, "He wants her and the baby she never told him about." Of course it was false, but the emotional frenzy in the city was unstoppable. Sophia saw the headline at a newsstand and felt her stomach churn. She realized how cruel the media could be, turning her terror into cheap entertainment for the masses. When the assigned officer finally arrived, he was a young recruit named Morales, nervous and wide-eyed. He paced the hallway outside Carla's loft, occasionally eyeing the door as if expecting Brian to burst through at any second. Maria tried to make small talk, offering him coffee, but he politely declined, focusing on his job. Around midnight, the floor creaked in the hallway. Morales spun around, gun at the ready, but it was just the building superintendent, an old man with a slight limp carrying a toolbox. "Elevator's on the fritz again," he grumbled. After that, the tension settled into a dull, pulsing unease. Sophia lay on the sofa, eyes staring at the ceiling. Maria dozed in an armchair with her phone in hand. Eventually, the adrenaline wore off, replaced by exhaustion. They drifted into a thin sleep. In that hushed pre-dawn hour, Morales' radio crackled, something about a suspected break-in across town. He was ordered to assist. He hesitated, looking at the closed door of the loft, then followed orders. The hallway echoed with his fading footsteps. 10 minutes later, a silhouette appeared at the end of the corridor, creeping quietly up to Carla's door. The city was asleep. No one witnessed the figure crouched by the lock, testing it gently. On the other side, the sisters slept, unprotected. When Maria opened her eyes to see the silhouette standing over her, she wasn't sure if she was still dreaming. The man's face was partly illuminated by the dim streetlight filtering through a gap in the curtains. It was Brian. She let out a guttural scream. He lunged, pressing a rough hand over her mouth, hissing, "Shut up." Sophia jolted awake, her heart exploding with terror. Brian's eyes flicked between them, raw hatred etched into every line of his face. He wore black gloves, and in his left hand he held a hunting knife. The one stolen from the sporting goods store, presumably. Carla, startled by the commotion, stumbled out of her bedroom, gasped at the sight. Brian pivoted, brandishing the blade. "You, get back!" Terrified, Carla retreated, fear gripping every muscle. Sophia tried to speak, tried to beg, but her voice came out in strangled sobs. Brian tossed a glance at her, almost wild. "You think you can just leave me? You think you can just run?" He advanced on her, and in that moment, Maria dashed forward with a burst of courage, aiming the pepper spray. She managed to catch part of Brian's face. He roared, staggering back, swinging the knife blindly. Sophia shrieked. Carla froze in the corner, trembling. Brian wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie, cursing, barely able to see. He swung again, and Maria dodged, but the edge of the blade grazed her arm, drawing blood. She yelped. The room was chaos, a swirl of screams and the pungent smell of pepper spray, but the corridor was silent. No officer was there to save them. In the confusion, Carla grabbed a lamp from a side table and hurled it at Brian. It crashed against his shoulder, momentarily disorienting him. "Go!" she yelled at the sisters. Maria clutching her bleeding arm, and Sophia dashed for the door. But Brian recovered fast, blocked their path. He stared at Sophia with a twisted grin, eyes still watering from the spray. "You're not going anywhere." Then the hallway exploded with noise. Thunderous footsteps, a rush shout of police. The door burst open and Detective Caldwell led two officers inside. The living room lights flared on. Brian spun around, brandishing the knife at them. Caldwell aimed her gun, voice commanding, "Drop it, now!" For a second, time froze. Brian's eyes flicked from Caldwell's pistol to Sophia, cowering behind Maria. Rage and desperation played across his features. His life was over if he surrendered, but before he could make a move, an officer tackled him, sending him crashing into a coffee table. Wood splintered under the impact. He fought with manic strength, but the officers managed to wrench the knife from his grip, pinning him face down. Handcuffs clicked into place. The room erupted in sobs of relief. Sophia collapsed into Maria's arms, trembling uncontrollably. Carla sank to her knees, shock etched into her features. Caldwell let out a tight breath. For a moment, it seemed like the nightmare had finally ended, but nightmares rarely end neatly. The next day, Brian sat in an interrogation room, cuffed to a metal table. Detective Caldwell stood across from him, arms folded. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed. Brian said nothing, just glared with sullen fury. Caldwell tried to get him to confess to the escape, the break-ins, the attempted assault. He sneered, "She's the liar. She broke me first." He refused to cooperate, demanded a lawyer. Caldwell slammed a folder on the table, images of the stolen van, the sporting goods store break-in, the battered guard. "You're not talking your way out of this," she said coldly. He smirked. "I'm not talking at all." Caldwell finally left, sending a furious glance over her shoulder. The media rejoiced at the capture of the jilted jailbird. The city exhaled. But something felt off to Caldwell. She couldn't shake a grim sense that this story wasn't done. A day later, her instincts rang true. In a small corner of the local newspaper, a report emerged that the prison transport situation was more complicated than it seemed. Another inmate had orchestrated the break. Brian just took advantage of the chaos. That meant, in Caldwell's view, Brian might have had help. She tried to push for more resources to investigate, but the department moved on to other priorities. Brian was locked up. End of story. Or so they believed. Some time passed and life returned to a semblance of normal for Sophia and Maria. Carla's loft was repaired, but the sisters decided to move back to their old apartment. They had each other and a sense of closure. Brian was behind bars awaiting trial on new charges. Sophia tried to rebuild her life. She even contemplated therapy. Maria returned to her diner shifts, forging her path through the city's daily grind. Eventually, the memory of that night faded into the background, just another traumatic story in a place teeming with them. But in a prison cell far from the city lights, Brian's hatred continued to simmer. He told himself he wouldn't rest until he got real revenge. He'd call in favors if he had to, twist the system, do whatever it took. And so a new plan began forming, a darker plan, one that would end in lethal violence and the worst twist imaginable for everyone involved. Months later, on the day the city held a carnival downtown, bright banners and cheerful music in the streets, something shifted behind the prison walls. Brian was working in the prison laundry when a guard turned his back at the wrong moment. Quick and silent, Brian slipped into the corridor, heart pounding. Within 20 minutes, alarms blared. The same question ricocheted through everyone's minds. How could this happen again? He'd cut through a fence near the garbage loading area where a truck was due to leave. Timing was everything. Another guard, strolling outside with a cup of coffee, found the severed links of wire too late. By the time the search started, Brian was already out of the vicinity, ducking behind industrial dumpsters, eventually hopping onto the back of a produce delivery truck that rattled down the highway. Once out of sight, he slid off the truck near a strip mall, disappearing like a shadow. Immediately, the city fell into a familiar panic. News bulletins repeated the same urgent lines. Brian Roth, convicted felon, has escaped once more, considered extremely dangerous. Detective Caldwell slammed a fist on her desk in disbelief. She demanded a full internal review of the prison's security. Meanwhile, local talk radio lit up with outraged callers. "This incompetent system is letting a monster roam free." Caldwell put out an all-points bulletin, first place to check the sister's apartment. But the city's labyrinth of side streets offered Brian endless hiding spots. He was on the move, an unstoppable force of rage. And in his twisted mind, there was only one reason for this second chance at freedom: to finish what he started. This time, the police moved swiftly. Officers were stationed outside the sisters' apartment building. Sophia and Maria were told to remain inside, stay away from the windows, keep their phones on at all times. Local media camped on the sidewalk, eager for sensational footage. From behind the blinds, Sophia could see cameras flashing, reporters setting up tripods, neighbors peeking out from doorways. It was like being under siege. Even the building superintendent tried to help by installing an extra deadbolt on the sisters' door, but fear gnawed at them. The system had failed once, and Brian was cunning. Late that night, the reporters finally went home, the street emptied, and a hush fell over the block. Inside, the sisters sat on the couch, arms around each other. Sophia's phone rang. Her heart leapt into her throat. She showed the screen to Maria. Unknown number. With trembling fingers, she answered, a silence on the other end. Then, a distorted whisper, "I'm coming for you." The line went dead. Sophia nearly dropped the phone, tears brimming. Maria locked every window. They didn't sleep that night, waiting for a storm that never arrived. Brian was out there, somewhere. 2 days later, Detective Caldwell got a tip that Brian had been spotted in an abandoned auto body shop near the train tracks. A squad of officers raced there, shouting warnings, flashlights sweeping through the darkness. They found only a makeshift cot, some canned food, and a map with certain streets circled, including the sisters' address. Caldwell's radio crackled with tension. She felt a chill. Brian had plans. She rushed to the building where Sophia and Maria lived, triple-checking the perimeter with her team. Then came a 911 call from a neighbor. Someone had jimmied open the basement door. Caldwell barreled down the stairs, gun drawn, scanning the gloom. Empty. That's when she realized how easily Brian could slip into the building's labyrinth of utility rooms and maintenance corridors, especially if he'd planned it meticulously. She barked orders into her radio. "I need backup at the east stairwell." Officers scrambled, footsteps echoing. The tension was palpable. Then a scream tore through the building. Caldwell sprinted up 2 flights, heart hammering, unsure whose scream it was. The moment she reached the sisters' apartment, she found the door wide open, lock busted. She rushed inside, saw the place in disarray. Furniture knocked over, broken glass. Maria stood in the corner, panting, clutching her neck where a bruise was already forming. She pointed frantically to the bedroom. Sophia was gone. Caldwell's eyes darted around. She radioed an emergency call. Suspect may have taken a hostage. Building 402, second floor, code red. Maria sobbed. "He came out of nowhere, hit me, dragged her away." Caldwell scanned the hallway. Some neighbors peeked out, terrified. "Anybody see him leave?" she shouted. No one answered. A few pointed to the stairwell leading to the roof. Caldwell signaled an officer to stay with Maria, then bolted upstairs. The roof door was ajar, the wind whipping it back and forth. Caldwell emerged onto the rooftop, scanning the darkness with her flashlight. That's when she spotted them near the edge. A man pinned a woman against the ledge, overshadowed by the city skyline's faint glow. She recognized the shape of Brian's wiry frame, saw the gleam of a knife in his hand. The woman's face was turned away, twisted in terror, hair whipping around in the wind. Caldwell shouted, "Freeze! Drop the weapon!" Her voice cracked with urgency. Brian turned, the scowl on his face more feral than ever. In that flicker of a moment, something about the woman's face jolted Caldwell. The city lights revealed subtle differences. It wasn't Sophia, it was Maria. She realized with horror that the sisters must have switched rooms or something. But wait, no. Maria had been in the apartment a minute ago. Confusion froze Caldwell. A scream pierced the air. The twins were identical. Who was Brian actually holding? "I'm sorry," the woman cried. "Please!" Caldwell's mind spun. She could only see the woman's profile in the gloom. Then she remembered the bruise was on Maria's neck. Caldwell had seen it seconds ago. So that meant the woman pinned against the ledge now had no visible mark on her neck. That had to be Sophia, right? But the voice, it sounded more like Maria's. The distortion of the wind made it impossible to be certain. The twins shared a haunting similarity. Brian tightened his grip on her, pressing the knife to her throat. Caldwell advanced slowly, gun aimed. "Brian, let her go! There's nowhere to run." She circled slightly, angling for a clear shot, the adrenaline pounding in her ears. He barked back, "She's going to pay." The woman was sobbing. I'm not who you think I am." She tried to say something else, but Brian silenced her by wrenching her hair back, exposing her neck. Caldwell was maybe 10 feet away now. If she fired, the bullet could hit the hostage if Brian moved at the last second. Then, behind them, a door slammed open. Another figure stumbled onto the roof, followed by an officer. A chaotic shout rang out. "Sophia, are you okay?" Caldwell whipped around and in that fleeting second realized the woman pinned against the ledge was wearing the green sweater Maria had on earlier. The second figure wore a red tank top. Sophia's clothes. That meant, unbelievably, Brian had grabbed the wrong twin. The stories would later say it was a fatal twist of fate. The confusion in that final moment was absolute. Caldwell tried to yell, "Stop!" But it happened too fast. The officer behind them tried to intervene. Brian jerked the knife. The woman gave one last shriek. A single shot echoed. Brian staggered, eyes wide, blood seeping through his shirt. He collapsed, but the woman in his grasp tumbled backward, arms flailing, her body pitching over the edge, her scream cut short by a sickening thud on the concrete below. Time slowed to a harrowing stillness. Caldwell rushed to the ledge, peered over, expecting to see Sophia's lifeless body, but even in the gloom, she could see the hair color, the way the limbs were sprawled. It wasn't Sophia at all. The twisted horror sank in. It was Maria. Below, paramedics would later confirm there was no pulse. On the rooftop, Sophia screamed, an otherworldly wail. She sank to her knees, face contorted in agonized disbelief. The swarm of officers arrived, pulled Sophia away, pinned down Brian's bleeding form. He clung to consciousness just enough to murmur, "She deserved it." Caldwell looked at him with raw hatred, wanting to see him rot. Adrenaline pumping, she called for immediate medical assistance, though she already knew the woman below was gone. "It's over," Caldwell said, voice trembling. Brian coughed, blood staining his lips, a venomous grin twisting his face. "Doesn't matter. I finally got her." Then his eyes rolled back. Maybe he believed, in his final delirium, that he'd accomplished his goal. But the horrific truth was that he'd killed the wrong sister in an accident fueled by cruelty and confusion. The swirl of sirens, flashlights, and frantic shouts continued through the night, the building transformed into a scene of tragedy. A hush settled over the city in the aftermath, an entire community sickened by what had just taken place. Cameras flashed like lightning outside the courthouse. The news spread in a heartbeat. Brian Roth, the man who escaped prison not once but twice, had made a final savage act that ended in the death of Maria Delgado, the twin he mistakenly believed was his cheating wife. Twisted tragedy. Fugitive kills the wrong sister, the tabloids screamed. Reporters flooded every vantage point, jostling for vantage as paramedics carried the body away under a white sheet. Neighbors stared from their windows, hands over their mouths, some openly weeping. How could a mistake so nightmarish happen in real life? The story dominated the headlines for weeks. Detective Caldwell was forced to give multiple interviews, each time barely containing her anger at the prison system that let Brian escape. Sophia was taken to the hospital for shock and minor injuries. She was inconsolable, the doctors said. She'd lost her sister, her best friend. The only reason she was alive was a grim accident of timing and clothes, all because Brian, in his vengeful rage, couldn't tell the difference until it was too late. In a final twist that the media devoured, Brian survived the gunshot, though he was critically injured. He ended up in the hospital wing of a maximum security facility. Tabloids got wind that his last words in the ambulance were, "She shouldn't have betrayed me." There was no remorse, no apology. Sophia suffered near catatonic shock, slipping in and out of nightmares about the rooftop. She refused any attempts by reporters to interview her, refused to talk to lawyers about any civil suits. She just wanted to disappear. Court proceedings dragged on. Prosecutors built a rock-solid case from the first prison break to the final confrontation. Witnesses testified about Brian's violent history, the stolen weapons, the repeated threats. Carla took the stand, describing the earlier attack in her loft. She broke down midway through, sobbing that she wished she could have done more. Neighbors recounted hearing screams that night, though none dared to intervene. The day Sophia testified was the day reporters crammed the gallery, hungry for a sensational scoop. She trembled as she described seeing her sister's crumpled form on the pavement below. At one point, she locked eyes with Brian, who stared back blankly, shackles around his wrists and ankles. Her voice quavered. "He killed my sister, and he didn't even realize it was the wrong person. That's how much he hated me." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The defense tried to angle for a plea of insanity, but Brian's methodical planning, the escape, the stolen weapons, all spelled out a man who knew exactly what he was doing, even if the final outcome was marred by confusion in the heat of the moment. The judge's face remained stony throughout, occasionally glancing at pictures of Maria. The final verdict was no surprise. Guilty on all counts, with a recommendation for life without parole. When the judge asked Brian if he had any words before sentencing, he shrugged, turned, and spat. She had it coming. The room erupted in outrage. He had sealed his fate. The gavel pounded down, the harsh clack echoing through the silent spectators, a moral thunderbolt to end a tragic chapter. But for Sophia, there was no closure. After the trial, Sophia drifted through life like a ghost. She refused to stay in the old apartment, unable to bear the memories. She sold off whatever meager possession she had. She avoided Carla, thinking her presence brought bad luck to everyone around her. She wandered the city aimlessly, sometimes recognized by strangers who whispered, "That's the sister who survived." She hated their pity, hated that her life became a public spectacle. Detective Caldwell tried to check up on her a few times. Each time, Sophia's eyes were vacant, grief radiating like a dull ache. The detective told her, "I'm sorry we couldn't save her." Sophia just nodded, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. She recalled how Maria had always been the brave one, the one who protected her. Their childhood memories fused in her mind, but every recollection ended with that final image, Maria's body lying far below the rooftop's ledge. Sophia couldn't shake the idea that it should have been her. She was the one who left Brian, the one who reported him, the one he truly wanted. Instead, she lived, carrying guilt like a tumor in her chest. The city turned the tragedy into a cautionary tale. Talk show hosts ranted about prison reform, domestic violence, and the failings of the justice system. Candlelight vigils were held for Maria. People who never knew her posted tributes online, outraged at a world where an innocent could be so brutally stolen away by a man's rage. But public attention eventually faded. Another crime wave took the headlines, another scandal replaced the outcry. Life in the city rolled on, chewing up memories as easily as it created them. In time, Detective Caldwell found herself transferred to a different precinct, investigating other cases that mirrored the city's endless cycle of violence. She sometimes thought of Sophia and wondered if she'd ever find peace. She sometimes thought of the look in Brian's eyes, that twisted triumph. But the job never paused long enough to let her fully dwell on it. The city demanded constant vigilance, and Caldwell gave it everything she had, burying her regrets under new daily crises. Meanwhile, in a windowless cell, Brian remained unrepentant. He healed from the gunshot wound, though the scar on his torso served as a permanent reminder of his final confrontation. Prison guards reported that he kept to himself, quietly simmering in rage. Some said he scrawled Sophia's name on the wall, crossing it out repeatedly. Others claimed he was medicated to keep his violence in check. Regardless, he'd never see the outside world again. On nights when the wind howled through the barred windows, he might have replayed that final moment on the rooftop. But by all accounts, he never admitted regret. He took it to his solitary cell like a twisted badge of honor, a final testament to his bottomless spite. Sophia eventually left the city, relocating to a small coastal town with whatever money she'd saved, plus a modest donation from Carla's church group. She found work cleaning rooms at a local motel, and for a time that numb routine was all she could manage. Every morning she stood by the water, letting the salty breeze wash over her. She'd recall Maria's laugh, the same sweet tone they once shared. Some days she spoke aloud, apologizing to the empty sky for surviving. On other days, she pressed her hand to her chest, remembering that she'd promised Maria they'd always be sisters first, no matter what. The tragedy had stolen her twin, but it hadn't stolen the memories of the good times. Sleepovers, secret jokes, birthday cakes they'd pretend to share even though each wanted her own flavor. Those glimpses of love kept her grounded, helped her resist the spiral of despair. Occasionally news came trickling through about Brian's final sentencing or an appeal attempt that went nowhere. It sparked fleeting coverage on crime blogs, rehashing the shocking detail that he'd killed the wrong woman. Sophia felt sick each time she stumbled across one of those headlines. No amount of therapy could fully rid her of the nightmares. They lessened, but never vanished. She avoided forming close bonds, too afraid that her presence might curse another loved one. She shut herself off emotionally, a living shell. But in quiet moments, she remembered how Maria would never have wanted that. Maria had fought for both of them, had tried to protect her until the very end. Perhaps, Sophia mused, the best tribute was to live fully. Yet, that notion felt as distant as the horizon over the ocean. Years slip by, the city forgets, but it never truly forgives. Detective Caldwell rose through the ranks, forging a reputation as a tough but empathetic officer who'd seen the worst of human violence up close. Journalists sometimes asked about that Brian Roth case, a historical footnote by then, overshadowed by new outrages. Caldwell always summarized it in stark terms. He escaped, murdered an innocent woman, and now he's locked away forever. There's no justice in that, just punishment. She found no solace in the outcome, just a cautionary lesson about how quickly cruelty can become tragedy. On a personal note, she acknowledged that the city's swirl of rumor and drama had devoured yet another fragile life. No public policy or press conference could truly fix that. In a final act of closure, Sophia returned to the city one last time to gather any belongings left behind in storage, as well as to place a modest memorial plaque for Maria in a community garden they once visited. She arrived unannounced, wore large sunglasses to avoid recognition, and slipped through the streets quietly. She visited the site of the old apartment. The building superintendent recognized her, gave her a somber nod, said something about how sorry he was. Sophia couldn't speak, she just nodded back. Then she made her way to the garden, a small patch of green amid the concrete sprawl. She placed a metal plaque bearing Maria's name and a brief message about cherishing her kindness and bravery. She sank to her knees in the dirt, tears trailing down her cheeks. "I miss you," she whispered. She stayed there for an hour, ignoring the hustle of the city beyond the garden fence. In that quiet, she felt a strange mix of guilt and gratitude that she was still breathing while Maria wasn't. But maybe, in the cosmic sense, she was carrying Maria with her. They were twins, after all. Two halves of a story whose final chapters had been stained in blood. As dusk settled, she rose and walked away, the plaque shining faintly under the orange glow of streetlights. She passed the pizzeria sign that once flickered near their old apartment. It was broken, now fully dark, perhaps a sign that some illusions had ended permanently. Sophia realized she had nowhere left to go in this city, so she caught a train back to the coast, letting the rattling of the tracks lull her into a restless doze. In a dreamlike haze, she saw Maria, smiling, urging her forward. When she opened her eyes, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could keep going another day. In a final press interview months later, when asked for a statement, Detective Caldwell reflected, "We often talk about justice, but there's no justice that can bring back Maria Delgado. All we can do is make sure no one else falls victim to a system that allows men like Brian Roth to slip through the cracks." Her words resonated in the short attention span of the public, then faded. But for a handful of people, the memory remained etched into their souls. Carla would look at the corner of her living room where the coffee table broke, remembering the terror. Neighbors would recall the night the lights went out, and somewhere in a cramped cell, Brian rotted away, never once confessing any remorse for an unspeakable crime he'd committed almost by accident. For Sophia, the cautionary tale had cost her everything except the faint spark of life that remained. She carried on, day by day, step by step, haunted by the knowledge that her sister's death had been the outcome of a monstrous confusion. The city moved on, but the memory lingered like a scar in its history, and for anyone who dared look closely, it stood as a grim reminder. Sometimes the worst tragedies arise, not just from evil, but from a single, horrifying mistake.